From 200 miles up, the place I come from, the one that created me and you, looks peaceful and fragile. On the surface, it's magnificent, wild and abundant, exploding with millions of different life forms, each one exquisitely adapted to its habitat. Ever spinning and changing, with its inhabitants competing and cooperating. Then there's us, the rogue species, with our powerful, imaginative, and intelligent brains, causing the whole enterprise to buckle under the weight of our ascent. Since we left our first habitat, 60,000 years ago, we've made some changes, making new habitats that separate us from the land and from each other, while other life forms are pushed to extinction, except, of course, bedbugs, pigeons, and stinkweed. Like orphans left on the Earth's doorstep after a fierce storm, we know little about ourselves, our natures, creating at times conditions of sublime beauty, and at times of untold suffering. Our good brains have evolutionary flaws which can only be fixed by our good brains. It's a dilemma. We need to settle down and figure out how to live here. There's no other choice. The nearest planet, Venus, is 800 degrees Fahrenheit and smells like rotten eggs. Next closest is Mars, where there's less actual water on the entire planet than we have in one stalk of celery. We can protect our home planet as a place of enduring beauty and exhilaration by adapting our needs to our habitat.
The only way in which I think we are going to be able to create a planet that has a future is we are going to have a much more cooperative society to build better communities and for the Earth to be treated better. We're going to have to change the structure of how we do business.
A good place to begin to change the structure of how we do business is to examine the way we grow and sell food, an activity that has changed more in the past 50 years than it has in the past 10,000. This system, now dominated by large corporations, uses enormous amounts of energy and toxic chemicals while creating an array of environmental problems. Companies that experiment with the basic elements of life, with the goal to control the world's food supply, from the gene to the grocery shelf. Promoting a variety of food-like substances for the whole family. The selling of food is also controlled by fewer and fewer large supermarket chains. This system is designed for efficiency, to produce cheap food and reap one major product, maximum profits.
You take the top 10 retailers in the United States and they scoop up, so huge amount of the food business that is going. And those monopolies are controlling all of the aspects of the distribution system to the detriment of all of the farmers, the pollution. And that is all a system that brings employment opportunities down, it brings income opportunities down, it really stretches all parts of our society.
Our industrialized food system, intended to promote competition, looks more like central planning, which is the reason we opposed other systems. So that wouldn't happen here.
People have less in their pockets than they used to. They have less savings for the future. The future looks bleak for the majority of Americans. As a result, we have a race to the bottom. And what cooperatives are is a means of raising everybody to the top.
Moving away from a monopoly-controlled system to one that strengthens communities and protects the environment is the reason I joined a food cooperative. My co-op, located on Main Street in Greenfield, Massachusetts, is one of over 300 food cooperatives across the country, each one owned by people who want good food and who care about how it's grown and the people who grow it.
This year, we're expanding our business offices.
It's democracy in action at the local level, where it can have a big effect. Which makes me wonder why it hasn't caught on more, and how during the last 3 decades, giant corporate-owned supermarkets managed to gain control of over 80% of all U.S. food sales, while the cooperative share is less than 0.5%. To find out the answer, I had to go back in time to learn what forces were at work beyond what I was seeing. The first thing I learned is that co-ops began in the early 19th century. They were started by English weavers who were forced into servile labor under a new industrial system.
They were people who said, we want to be in control of the mechanism whereby we feed ourselves. The idea of cooperation will be better for us in the long run, and we will not need charity if we're able to succeed in self-help.
They saved what little wages they earned and opened the first food cooperative, selling flour, oatmeal, and candles. Their idea of open membership and selling wholesome food is the legacy we follow 170 years later. By going back, I hope to learn the differences between competitive and cooperative systems, businesses that want to dominate, in contrast to those that seek trusting relationships. This is the kind of business the folks who started my co-op wanted, and a place to buy tofu turkey. But in order to understand the challenges of developing a society based on cooperation, I had to move away from Main Street to a different era and another American street. To a time when 1% of the population owns 40% of the nation's wealth. 200 corporations control half of all American industries. Leaders tout the virtues of individualism and free enterprise, while the vast majority have few opportunities to improve their lives. Reckless, unregulated credit schemes create a mountain of debt. Inflation soars, consumer spending plummets, and the bubble bursts.
For me, what's at stake with the co-ops is ultimately about a new way of organizing society. Our economic system is set up in such a way that really is unjust, and without other explanation, it just really is not a just society, because it really favors the concentration of wealth. It really harkens back to the founders of our own co-op. Wanting to create an alternative economic system was one of the driving factors of what they were doing 40 years ago. We may not look like what they envisioned, because we changed to stay in business, but what drives my motivation is that we're building a society that has the goal of no exploitation in it. And that's really, I think, at the root of what the co-op business model is. It's really taking democracy and bringing it into an economic environment.
Following the stock market crash of 1929, President Herbert Hoover assures the nation that a minor quirk has occurred in an otherwise sound economic system. His claim that a return to prosperity is just around the corner is a stark contrast to reality. As hard times spread, an increasing number hold but one limited aspiration: survival.
It's impossible for me to get a job anywhere. Nobody want to hire me out, and the only help that I have at all is $2 a week on federal relief.
The Depression takes away people's livelihoods, and with them, their dignity and sense of self-worth. By 1933, 13 million Americans have lost their jobs. 10,000 banks have failed. 25% of the population is unemployed, while another 25%, though counting themselves lucky to have work, suffer deep cuts in wages. People who had lived productive lives find themselves and their families living hand to mouth, or worse, tossed to the streets to beg for food.
The poor and unfortunates like myself on State Street are begging for a bowl of soup and for a sandwich. We haven't got no work. We can't get no work. We're looking for work. We can't get no work, but we will someday in the future.
As winter descends on Chicago in 1932, hungry, cold, and jobless citizens tear up the wood-paved streets in a desperate attempt to heat their homes. For those who do work, low wages bring mounting confrontations between management and labor. Within a 3-year span, 10,000 strikes erupt across the country. Hired company agents work with the police to overpower protesters. Responding to the urgency of the situation, the federal government starts work programs.
This is no unsolvable problem if we face it wisely and courageously. It can be accomplished in part by direct recruiting by the government itself. Our greatest primary task is to put people to work.
President Franklin Roosevelt's Works Progress Administration builds railroads, parks, and other public facilities. But recovery is slow and has numerous critics.
The cost of the New Deal threatens to exceed that of the Great War. The folly and waste must be cut out of this expenditure and the federal government budget balanced, or we shall see one of 3 horsemen ravage this land: taxation, or repudiation, or inflation.
Work programs are cut, declared unconstitutional by the Supreme Court. Unemployment remains stubbornly high, and the Great Depression continues.
Come on, you good time people.
While discord ripples across the countryside, a movement swells without fanfare in the Midwest. People hit by hard times come together to share their problems, then decide to take matters into their own hands. For them, the solution is in a system that emphasizes cooperation instead of competition, through democratically run, collectively owned, independent businesses. Convinced of the simple, practical wisdom of their approach, they labor for over a decade to make it work, then set out to tell their fellow Americans what they have learned. The middle path between capitalism and socialism is the way out of the Depression. Cooperative economies, they believe, promise a more stable future, led by consumers and strengthened with each purchase. By 1938, 15 regional warehouses are supplying hundreds of co-op grocery stores. Within the co-op system, farmers, free from the control of large corporations, begin to get a fair price for their labor. As their power increases, they branch out into manufacturing their own equipment. In Columbus, Ohio, cooperatives start their own department store, which grows to 8 regional stores. Investors in these businesses come not from Wall Street, but from the Consumers Cooperative Association, with 125,000 members in 9 states. Through these efforts, co-ops see a 17% increase in employment. This new method of wealth creation begins to grow exponentially as people who work in co-op businesses deposit their checks in cooperatively run banks, which in turn invest in cooperatively run businesses. Most impressive of all are co-ops' efforts to disrupt big business monopolies by drilling, pumping, and refining their own oil. selling gasoline in over 2,000 service stations in 9 states. As the co-op model proves effective, there seems to be no limit on its challenge to corporate control.
A large number of consumer cooperatives were established in the 1930s all across the country by people who had something that they felt they could achieve. There was something that they could create. There was something that they could build. They didn't want to give up hope. They wanted to make that hope come alive, and it came alive in the many, many thousands of cooperatives that were created.
Co-op leaders see the sun rising on a new spirit of American cooperation, which they tout as the democratic alternative to capitalism, leading the way to a morally based economic system that is open to everyone, principled, and fair. A clear step forward from the miseries brought on by human exploitation. After a decade of hard times, this peaceful social economic movement is heading toward a future of shared prosperity, a cooperative commonwealth whose time has finally arrived, but then is abruptly halted. The attack on Pearl Harbor alters the path of co-op development. Cooperative ideals take a backseat to more pressing needs.
Training to develop muscles, to toughen and harden men for any job assigned. Training that teaches quick thinking, speed, balance, and timing.
On the home front, once dormant factories now run around the clock, fueled by a massive increase in government spending. The Great Depression ends. Anyone that wants a job has one, making bombs, guns, and related weapons.
The battlefields of America are the production lines. The sweat and muscle and brains of men and women pounding out the tools of victory, slugging out more and more and more.
All of the effort that went into the war immensely weakened all of the effort that was going on in cooperatives. The various efforts that people were doing at the local level, building a better society, went out of the window.
With 40% of the nation's productive capacity allocated to war, corporate lobbyists head to Washington to obtain government contracts. Soon they attained 70% of all war-related manufacturing, up from only 30% 2 years earlier. Senator Harry S. Truman, as head of the Special Committee to investigate the National Defense Program, warns that the emergency of war has created the biggest business monopolies in the history of the world. Smaller companies are driven out of business, as the country is again on a course of major industries controlled by a few large corporations. Secretary of the Interior Harold Ickes gives a dire warning to the Rural Electric Cooperative Association.
If the ultimate result of our enormous sacrifices of this war shall be to solidify the hold of the monopolists upon this country, if these are the things we are sweating for and shedding our blood for, then my advice to you would be to seek an immediate peace with the enemy. There is no difference ultimately between an economy dictated by fascism and one imposed by concentrated wealth.
Farms also consolidate, as farmers leave the fields to fight on the front lines or work in the factories. Farms grow larger in size and fewer in number. Chemical companies, with backing from government agencies, press growers to use inadequately tested pesticides, herbicides, and chemical fertilizers to increase yields. Other scientific breakthroughs change the face of warfare, while continuing an age-old pattern of the human condition. Americans awake to a new chapter in human history. Knowledge of the chain reaction that powers the sun is now available to annihilate life on Earth. No one is safe. And there's no escape from another powerful new force, modern advertising.
And here's real money-saving news.
You're suddenly shapelier.
It's true, it's gone, the filter tape is gone.
After the war ends, corporate retailers launched the largest advertising campaign in the history of civilization.
Now try this new way to accent your figure.
Americans are heading down a fresh paved highway to a strange new destination. In the process, discounting their roles as citizens of local communities for their new role as consumers in a mass market.
Remember, this is a limited offer.
So rich, so creamy.
Take your troubles to the town.
Nothing like it anywhere.
Get down on your knees and pray.
Creamy lather. Creamy body.
Choose lemon, lime, or mint. Delicious.
Try Halo. And your sorry hind.
The dream world of utopian consumerism surpasses co-op idealism for a better society. The cooperative approach of active involvement to address local needs seems of a bygone era.
During the 1950s, cooperatives were not as attractive to the user as the changes in the marketplace happened. Most cooperatives were in the centers of the cities, and the population out-migrated. The chain stores came along, and they did a lot of advertising. The whole focus was on the single-family home and the tract outside of the center of town, and the car and the individualism, and the whole advertising gamut created this kind of individual. It was an era in which interest in consumer cooperatives in particular was reduced, and the cooperatives themselves, there were less of them.
As large corporations grow even larger, appealing to the mass market, they develop sophisticated tactics, hiring actors to serve as pitchmen for their consumer products.
Well, that's part of living better electrically.
They also break new ground when General Electric CEO Charles Wilson is appointed head of the Office of Defense Mobilization. Wilson advocates for a permanent wartime economy, which he claims is needed to ward off another depression. Real and imagined threats are promoted by Defense Department-sponsored films, warning of a new menace, justifying a perpetual increase in military spending.
Who elected you to run this community? By what right do you tell us what to believe in and where to live and what to read? We're Americans, and we believe in the freedom of the individual to make up his mind for himself. It's not the state that comes first, it's the people in it. And if you don't recognize the rights of the people, you don't belong here. Take your hands off me. Let go! Let me go! Let me go!
People who were organizing cooperatives during that period were always accused of being communists, even though there are very few links between cooperatives and the Communist Party. They were exploited by the enemies of cooperatives, and I think that it depressed a lot of interest that would normally have come into cooperatives during that era because people did not want to be accused of being a communist.
Consumer and military spending become the twin engines that power the U.S. economy. Soon after World War II ends, more than half of the federal budget would go toward current and future wars. Under the cloud of Cold War paranoia, co-ops are attacked by big business as un-American organizations. Setting up a front called the National Tax Equality Association, they claim that co-ops take advantage of the free market and do not pay their fair share in taxes.
It was part of the front that felt that cooperatives had some relationship to communism and we should stop them at every particular way in which we could. The fact that we share our profits with our members is one of the things that is really, really good. You want to share your profits with your customers, you'll get a tax reduction as well.
By the early 1950s, it's clear that co-ops have powerful enemies.
Now, I don't object to co-ops being in business, but I think it's only fair that they pay an equal share of the tax load. That's why I'm going to do something about it today. I'm writing to the representative in Congress from my district and the 2 senators from my state, saying that I think that cooperatives and mutuals should pay their fair share of income taxes right along with the rest of us. But how about you? What are you going to do about it?
Co-ops learn the importance of gaining political support and find a stellar champion in California Congressman Jerry Voorhees.
You remember this veteran case?
Voorhees helped form and finance many co-ops during the Great Depression.
He was concerned about the little guy, the little businessman, the little grocer. He was very concerned about the impact of bigness on Main Street America. He talked about what we should be afraid of, what we should be concerned about, what we should encourage, and what we should try not to encourage. He actively attempted in every way possible to build the kind of society through cooperatives that he felt would be the best to serve America.
In 1946, Jerry Voorhees is challenged by a young lawyer from Whittier, California. In his first run for office, Richard Nixon displays a distinct approach to political campaigning.
He tied Jerry Voorhees into different little sort of, well, you know this person and that person know that person, and that person is a communist. And he made it sound like Jerry Voorhees was an active communist and against everything that the United States stood for, and none of it was true.
The tactic works and launches Nixon's political career. He is elected senator, then vice president, and eventually president. Nixon would later get into trouble, confusing his presidential power with that of the king. Jerry Voorhees is appointed head of the Cooperative League of the USA. He continues to advocate for co-ops for the next 20 years, during a time of fading public interest. While the country experiences unprecedented wealth and abundance, in rural areas and in the inner cities, it's an economic system of neglect. By the end of the 1950s, 55 million Americans are poor. Half of all African Americans live in poverty. The person who starts my co-op wants that to change.
I saw people who I felt were oppressed and not given a fair shake for no good reason. And that wasn't right, so we had to try to change things. I went down to Atlanta, Georgia. We lived in a house that was provided for us called Freedom House. We did various kinds of activities that would confront the white racist establishment. Boycotted places that were discriminating against black folks. We were kept busy.
Tom's participation in a sit-in lands him in the Fulton County Jail and increases his commitment to deal with the crucial underlying issue.
I got involved in the war on poverty in 1964 when my wife and I joined Vista, Volunteers in Service to America, where we worked almost completely with black migrant kids. School where I taught in Vista, they got the used books from the white school. while the white school got the new books. What kind of crap is that? But that's what it was like. Then after Vista, came up north, and I got a job as a community organizer in Turners Falls.
Turners Falls is the grand vision of industrialist Alva Crocker, who in 1870 entices investors and factory owners to build their plants along the Connecticut River. Water power and cheap rural labor fuel the production of paper, cotton, and cutlery to create a thriving and vibrant community. With thousands of citizens gainfully employed, townspeople build libraries, hospitals, a theater, schools, and playgrounds. Fueled by an equitable abundance, Main Street merchants and public officials generate civic pride and goodwill, taking most seriously their primary charge, the raising of the next generation. But poor planning and the lure of cheap labor elsewhere bring the vision to a sudden halt. Community, as it turned out, was a mere byproduct of wealth creation, not central to it. 60 years later, the town that was once heralded as one of the most prosperous in the state is now one of the poorest.
We tried to get poor people involved in programs that would be helpful. We got a food and nutrition grant, and we had to write up a program for how we would spend the money, and having a food co-op was one of them. It was funded by a poverty program. A lot of low-income people were eating over-processed food at fairly high prices. They didn't have much control over the quality or much of anything else. And so we worked with those people and see if we could do some good. The idea was to have good food at low prices. I had hired an organizer, and he came up with 10 or 15 households that said they'd be interested. He volunteered his apartment to be the drop-off place. It was really hard on the space, and as more people were interested, it was much more difficult to distribute the food and all. And somebody had learned about a building that was vacant, which was really a much better location. And then we started really expanding the co-op's activities. I like the idea that we had full-time working members that came in, would put in 3 or 4 hours every month, and they did various things to keep the co-op going.
Self-help programs, promoted by President Lyndon Johnson's War on Poverty, spring up in communities across the country. It is the beginning of a second wave of co-op development, this time centered on food.
Have you got yours, sir?
The multifaceted anti-poverty programs bring an immediate and dramatic reduction in poverty by empowering people to solve their own problems.
How many bags do you need?
Yeah, well, all right, how much?
$6. So 24. 24 tubes.
24? With,
Yeah.
with 2 bags?
Yeah. It's 25 cents a bag, John. You're 20.
Well, you're not getting any bargains down here. What is bargain day down here?
Every day in the week.
Going there one day, the price is 59 cents. The next day you go in, it's going up 10 cents more. Toilet tissues, 55 cents a roll. Soaps and things and powders, 89 cents a box. Everything you buy, butter, eggs, $1.19. You go to other stores further out of the neighborhood, you can get them for 89 cents.
Could I have a little bit of peace and quiet, please? You do? Instead of going shopping up to Jack's store or to Randy's store, we're going to a co-op place and buy this food at wholesale price, the same thing they pay for, and this way we don't have to pay any more for the food. Box of salt.
Anti-poverty programs help start hundreds of co-ops like mine. They also help farmers.
In the last 10 years, mechanization of the farms created a situation where quite a few of these farmers were without anything to do. So this cooperative was organized to be able to provide an income for the small farmer on a small amount of land. So we chose to go into what we call a vegetable producing co-op.
This Alabama co-op joins with over 100 other producer co-ops to form the Federation of Southern Cooperatives, an 11-state organization representing over 30,000 low-income families. By helping people to work together, co-ops are again challenging the established order.
The people here came out of the civil rights movement and believe in the cooperative movement.
It was the idea that we were masters of our own destiny. We did control what all we had, at what prices we sold them at, and how we distributed what little money we made. The original members, they were conservative, low-income and low-middle-income people. As things evolved, I think more and more of the folks that were, or the type of folks that were original members, tended to either leave the co-op or be subsumed by other members that had a more a different kind of a lifestyle than the normal one.
It was a coming together of people who were a part of that quote-unquote hippie movement, but were also much more politically focused, much more economically focused, social change focused. That was one of the beautiful things of coming of age in the 60s. We just felt that we could make a huge difference. Young people raising their voices and opposing the Vietnam War had an impact, and eventually it came to a stop. So why not also take on other huge monolithic cultural phenomenons with the same intention, which is to bring them back to a simpler, more peaceful, more holistic place? And what more important than food?
While co-ops attempt to gain a foothold in the larger economy, the food industry is engaged in a ruthless competition for corporate control. Within a decade, 2 million family farms go out of business. 600,000 are taken over by giant agribusinesses. The drive toward consolidation is led by the 37th President of the United States. Nixon's appointment of Earl Butz to head the Department of Agriculture is a watershed event for the country's farmers.
Unless there is some profit in food, there will be no food for people. If you want to eat well, and if you want your sons and your grandsons to eat well, we're going to make this industry pay.
A spike in food prices sets the stage for the transfer of billions of dollars from family farms to a few corporations. Efficiency through mechanization is the stated objective for a changed industry's central goal.
It's spelled P-R-O-F-I-T.
While at the same time, thousands of independent grocery stores and regional chain stores are driven out of business by giant chains. When the dust settles, the power is in the hands of a few remaining companies that demand price concessions from their suppliers. Centralized control reaps large profits and increases market share, which consolidates corporate power.
The agribusiness and the food industry were doing to food what corporate American capitalism was doing in almost every aspect of the American economy. It was centralizing the means of production in order to enrich those who could control the means of production. When you have to package food for mass distribution, you have to add a lot of chemical preservatives, you have to pump up the yields in production, which involves using lots of pesticides. The grains weren't whole grains, so if you're eating a loaf of bread, you're not getting anywhere near the nutrition that you would get as if you had a whole loaf of bread made from whole grains. It was a question about America being off track.
Economic issues seem to me to be the most important thing going on. Economic motives were underneath things that people talked about. They were underneath the way the communities were structured. They were underneath what wars we chose to involve ourselves in. The co-op felt like a truly nonviolent pursuit that was trying to change the society in the direction that I wanted to see changes happen. Greater economic justice and healthier food, rather than letting some corporation organize it for you, which seemed like it was beginning to look like it was disastrous to structure your way of life that way. This seemed an alternative. You get together with the people you know, the people around you in your community, you figure out what you want to do and you do it.
We saw a need for distributing food at a low price and to not energize big agribusiness and the produce terminals, which only serve to rip off the people and the farmers who grow the food. We see ourselves as an alternative to doing that because we deal with small farmers and also try to get good quality stuff and organically grown.
Agribusiness is taking over farming not by buying up the land and making the farmer a hireling, but by taking over all the inputs that a farmer has to buy and by taking over all the marketplaces that a farmer has available to sell to.
With an expanding industrial food system comes an environmental crisis. Petroleum-based fertilizers, herbicides, and fungicides that corporations promise will feed the world instead devastate ecosystems and turn nutrient-rich soils into a lifeless substance. An informed public is galvanized to take action, and co-ops are seen as part of the solution.
How do you see the store fitting into the community?
I see it as something unusual and rare.
During the 1970s, food co-ops spring up across the land like mushrooms after a spring rain. My co-op is one of thousands of storefronts and buying clubs. The goal is to address the environmental and economic problems through healthier foods and cooperative economics.
The Uhuru Food Co-op was started by men and women from this community who were concerned about the low level of quality of food that we receive in our community, who wanted to bring a higher level of nutrition and nutrition information and education to the people of our community.
Our specialty is the whole grains, the whole products, millet, bulgur, chickpea flour, all types of soy products, soy powder, soy milk.
The rapid increase in co-op grocery stores creates the need for more co-op suppliers. In response, over 30 distribution centers and warehouses are started in places like Ann Arbor, Michigan, Madison, Wisconsin, Emeryville, California, Tucson, Arizona, and Brattleboro, Vermont. These become the hub of organic and whole grain deliveries to hundreds of new co-op stores in every region of the United States. The goal to establish an alternative economic system centered around food makes a big leap forward.
I really did think for a moment that perhaps we might just change the world that we were in, because people were starting to talk about cooperatives and to create cooperatives and buying clubs, and you know, it seemed to be everywhere. I mean, it seemed to be in every community.
I thought, how can I be involved in some kind of social change situation that everybody needs? And I thought, aha, voila, food, everybody needs food. church ladies, the farmers, the hippies. And so I thought, oh, this is cool. We can do this. I thought it would be so simple, but when I got into it, I realized, oh, even with something as simple as food, everybody had a different idea about it. Some people wanted it to be a church, some wanted it to be a daycare center, some wanted it to be a political alternative, some wanted it to be an educational thing. We used to have, I'm talking all-night meetings about whether or not the co-op should carry pet food. That's something that we want. We just want people food. And what do you mean? My cat is a person, and you know, oh my God. The board was sort of the manager, and everybody was in on the decision making, and even though it was still small, it was cumbersome.
Some people thought that you could have a store where you would tell people to take what you need and put in the cash register what you can. Some of the stores required everybody to work 3 to 5 hours a week. It was quite a struggle in a lot of the cooperatives, allowing for there to be a general manager when before it was collective management.
The managers we had weren't as skilled as we would have liked, but they were under difficult circumstances because they had employees who didn't really recognize them as managers. There was pressure from the workers saying, I want a cooperative workforce. I don't want to have any managers. I don't want anyone telling us what to do. It's almost like we were figuring out as we went along.
The store has to play its part in overcoming the ego through cooperation and selfless service. Cooperation sort of reinforces the group and over the single individual, and that's a very important thing when we're dealing with egotism.
You work down there and you get worn out. You know, that's a fact. It's just a matter of time. You realize that you're doing this gig and you're doing it a lot and you're not getting anything out of it. And once you realize you're not getting anything out of it, you say, well, what the hell am I doing it for, you know? I mean, all right, you get the satisfaction of giving people food for a cheap price, but then you realize that's all you're doing. You know, you're giving. You're giving, you're giving, you're giving.
We don't get paid salaries because we are working selflessly to overcome our ego consciousness and to work towards a better world. And I think the movement is facilitating a new society, a new consciousness. It's not just cheap food. It's a new era of time, varying age.
We had very idealistic ways in which we could build this new society, but a lot of those idealistic ways weren't grounded in true economic principles. And regretfully, although a lot of cooperatives were founded in the 1960s and 70s, many of them passed away over time.
Of the 800 co-ops started, only 200 remain. Of the 30 co-op warehouses, only 2 survive.
I'm gonna fish you too. I bet your life, your loving wife, catch more fish in you. Any fish bite, got good bait. Here's a little something of a lesson there. Any fish bite, got good fish. I'm gonna fish it. Yes, I'm gonna fish it. I'm gonna fish it too.
The business decisions began to challenge the ideology that we had been working on. We had to think about what we were doing in terms of how it would play out economically.
In a world dominated by grocery chains, co-ops face grave challenges. Their path to survival is in the growing market of whole and natural foods that they pioneered. But by heading down that path, they would forestall their mission to sell low-cost food in low-income neighborhoods. A plan is put forward at my co-op to move to another town, one with a larger population and a higher per capita income.
Everybody understood that in moving to Greenfield, there would be more people who would shop at the co-op. The kinds of foods that we were using were becoming more popular.
I didn't want the co-op to move to Greenfield. Turner's Falls had a lot of people who needed it for economic reasons and were using it as a source of cheap food.
I wanted to move it, and some people really did not, and some of the older people that had built it up.
The decision about moving to Greenfield split the community. That's why it was so traumatic, because it wasn't just a business decision, it was a community decision.
The whole store was on the line. Since it was a barely salvageable operation, there was no room for error, really. We had to get this right. We had to get this right if we were going to survive as a co-op.
It reacted to reality, the economic reality, the cultural reality. The original vision may have been flawed, but just because that vision wasn't met, there's no reason to say, well, we'll throw the baby out with the bathwater.
After a series of meetings, we just took a vote. And I think we lost some people when we took that vote.
It's one thing to make your own mistakes in your life and pay the consequences, but what if you make a decision for a community store and blow it? Then you've just lost everybody's money and hard work and their trust, and it felt really scary in that we still didn't exactly know how to run a grocery store.
10 years after the Montague Co-op began selling whole-grain foods out of someone's apartment, members take a bold leap of faith to revive their frail economic venture by changing locations. But unable to pay Main Street rents, the best they can do is to find a place on a side street. They also changed the co-op's name to display a more regional appeal.
Business started increasing immediately the moment we moved to Greenfield. The store had more products in it, started adding a couple of employees.
Sales just went up, whatever, 50, 60, 70%. It was like, oh my gosh, but trying to ride this beast, what do we do now? We got to come up with new systems to be able to have more employees and more keys, and who's going to schedule these cashiers, and what happens when somebody's sick. And the ordering became more complex.
Some people thought getting bigger was getting badder. It meant more impersonal, more profit, and there were other people who said, what's wrong with profit? As long as we share it amongst each other. What's wrong with getting bigger? We'll have more jobs, more food, more everything. And other people said, we'll lose our sense of community. Through that process, we had managers who quit, we had workers who quit, we had board presidents quit.
There came a time where they had to let me go. And I just thought, you dirty rats, after all I've done for you. And so there was my part-time job, there was my income. I didn't come in here for 2 years because I was so mad. Because in the end, really, I couldn't run a multi-million-dollar grocery store. I'm a clown. I mean, financial things were getting so complicated, I couldn't figure this out. What I've made meaning out of this is that there's a part that different kinds of people play in an organization. And I see myself as an overthruster, a person that comes in with a blast of energy, can see certain things. We gotta get to Greenfield, let's go. We're gonna get some land, that's it. And then there's the people that are gonna put their head in one of many available yokes and pull for the long term of mortgages and financial statements and personnel policies. And a lot of time the overthrust or more visionary people got to go because they're not going to stay there for the steady pull of it. And I thought it was meant that I wasn't valued and I wasn't needed, but I was needed for that part of it. And then other types of people are needed for the other parts of it, which they really have talent and time and skill that I didn't have.
While my co-op gains financial strength on a side street, Main Street is abandoned by chain stores that favor malls over village centers. The collapse of a 200-year-old downtown seems imminent when a plan is put forward for a new shopping area 2 miles north of Main Street and larger than the entire downtown. But this one doesn't go as planned. 3 weeks after residents reject Walmart's proposal, the Franklin Community Co-op makes its riskiest move ever when it takes over an abandoned storefront.
Well, it was a JCPenney store, and we turned it into a grocery store. All of the shelving and all the coolers, all that had to be brought in. We added bathrooms, added the office. upstairs and downstairs. We built a kitchen. Everyone was working for a reduced wage. It's because it's ours and we're running it ourselves, there's a huge different emotional content.
The Franklin Community Co-op, also called the Greenfields Market, moves into a space 10 times larger than its previous location, expanding in all areas and adding a deli and a bakery. The co-op has a livable wage policy and employee profit sharing, provides a community meeting space and a monthly newsletter, and has become a center of community life.
We were beginning to appreciate the fact that we had created a business that was community-owned, that was owned by the people who used it, and was helping Greenfield survive economically. Our cooperative business was becoming an important part of the vitality of the community as a whole.
My co-op story is similar to what happened in hundreds of communities across the United States. Using the principles of cooperation, people started small grocery stores, which they nurtured into multi-million-dollar businesses. They developed business skills and brought new products to their communities. Since the market crash of 1929 that launched the greatest economic crisis in U.S. history, we've had 14 recessions, one every 6 years on average. The most recent meltdown nearly brought down the entire worldwide economy. The only thing that prevented another Great Depression was the infusion of billions of dollars of public funds, a shocking contradiction of how the free market is supposed to work. Unstable seismic fault lines appear to be built into our economic system. In such self-contained, self-absorbed, unreflective systems, with few checks and balances, and a feverish intensity to build individual wealth, it's easy to lose your moral bearings, which affects neighborhoods and communities throughout the country.
I think as a result of all of that, people have been looking at what society should we build that won't have those kinds of mistakes happen, where our money can be safe, where our jobs can be safe. And I think that there's been a huge amount of focus on local. What are we doing locally? What can we do as individuals together? How can we help create jobs of the local economy? How can we keep our savings in the local economy? And every time that you ask those kinds of questions, the cooperative comes up as the most capable form of economic organization.
If food co-ops are to have an effect on the larger economy, they will need to increase their share of the money people spend on food. To see what that might look like, I went to the Minneapolis-St. Paul region of Minnesota. In a state with the largest number of food co-ops in the country, the Twin Cities has its greatest concentration.
In Minnesota, co-ops are really a part of our life because this is a really rich area for cooperation. Everybody around here knows what a co-op is. They just say the co-op, you know, and they know you're talking about a food co-op, even though, of course, there's many other types of co-ops. But the food co-ops have a high presence. We do business with not only local producers and local growers, but other people in the community. And so we're circulating dollars in our community. The co-op builds wealth for the community, not for any individual person. We became incredibly successful on this very slow, gradual track. When this store opened 12 years ago, this lot had been vacant for over 20 years, and it was a very blighted corner in the community. We were able to hold true to our values of delivering great service and great food, focusing on the natural and organic, the local products, and build commercial success, and build our communities.
In a 25-mile radius of the Twin Cities, 12 food co-ops total 88,000 members, 1,400 employees, and gross sales of over $193 million a year. Their collective power is perhaps most clearly demonstrated by the largest of the group.
I worked in the conventional grocery business for over 20 years in a conventional chain. The pressures are about putting the money on the bottom line. And so if you don't have your numbers in line, your gross margins, your labor percent, your sales, you're not really important. In a conventional world, it's all about profits. The less people you have working and the less benefits you're paying. In the co-op world, we're doing the opposite. 75% of our staff are full-time, 25 are part-time. In a conventional world, that's reversed. We've got 260 people working here in this store. We've never cut back our workforce. In 2008, when the economy went in the tank, we didn't lay off anybody. So that's a different kind of stress than you have in a conventional chain. When somebody is hammering you on a Friday morning that's picking up the phone and saying, you're 0.01 off your labor dollar. Can you explain that to me and tell me what that is? Pressures here are self-induced to make sure that we never lose the trust with our members, that we are what we say we are. Because we're very successful and we have this incredible growth, it gives us the opportunity to do projects that we might not be able to do otherwise. We have our own distribution center. It's our growth department. We expanded our warehouse about 5 years ago from 15,000 square feet to 45,000 square feet, added 91 pallet space freezer. We've expanded into more dairy products.
We purchase product to sell to our co-ops. The wedge guides us a little bit. They know what they need, but we also talk to the other stores to find out what they need, and then we talk to the growers to find out what they need. I farmed vegetables for 11 years, and when I was farming, price was the #1 thing that the larger stores wanted from us. They had all the cards. All right, they dictated the price. And so what you have is a system where, depending on how the buyer feels that way or what pressure he's getting from his stores or from his customers, he can knock you down pretty fast. And here at Co-op Partners and in the co-op world, that doesn't happen. What we like to do here is set our pricing with the farmers in the winter, and then we stick to it unless it's a bad year, and then we can negotiate and we can go up. It's important that we pay enough for what their product is. If you have a set price as a farmer, you're spending as if you're going to get that money. And so it can be a killer if somebody drops price on you. The co-ops will allow us to spend a little bit more to support a small grower, because we have to make sure that they can afford to stay in business.
There's been this huge consolidation of grocery distribution centers in the natural food world. That's food for thought.
The consolidation of the grocery business by a few major corporations is affecting the entire U.S. food supply, a trend known as the hourglass effect. Above are 2 million farmers. Below are 300 million Americans who eat the food they grow. During the last 20 years, the channel by which food is delivered to grocery stores has become smaller and smaller. Co-ops are one of the few businesses fighting to oppose the growing control of both our food and our economy.
And when you have agricultural systems that are just exploiting at the lowest per cost unit possible to make the price low, the inputs that are used to keep that land productive are such that their costs or the system that aren't accounted for that we're paying for. Rivers full of silt. Louisiana has a dead zone that's huge. You can't drink well water in the state of Iowa. So there's human health, there's planet health that are also at stake. The thing that often gets lost in economic activity is the human element, the people involved in the economy.
In the Twin Cities, the high presence of co-ops translates into the market power needed to oppose corporate control by supporting an increasing number of regional food sources and nurturing a new generation of farmers.
This will be our 5th season of operating the farm. Our farm is a teaching farm. And so we're always looking to make sure that our farmers that are working there are getting the knowledge that they need so that when they make their big decision to go out and farm on their own, we've given them the tools to be able to do that. And that's a different kind of farm than just hiring people to be farm workers.
In Minneapolis-St. Paul, it is the clustering of cooperatives that tend to bring a second level of energy to the cooperative world.
Herbs and spices.
By coming together to do projects together to support secondary activities such as education.
Most of us would not like to eat it like an apple.
Mississippi Market and the Wedge started a nonprofit educational organization that taught kids in the elementary schools about food. And they really have the kids excited about eating fresh food.
I was hired by 2 co-ops to do the work, and then other co-ops jumped on board. Now we're up to 6, and so the 6 food co-ops that give between $15,000 and $30,000 a year to our program. So we hit around 6,000 to 7,000 kids a year now at 40, 50 schools.
Well, what do you like about having a garden?
We can get a lot of stuff from there, like a lot of the foods and maybe some fruits from there, so we don't have to buy it from the store and we can just grow it fresh.
How's it taste? Is it any different?
Not that much.
The environment with multiple co-ops creates a dynamic. There are new co-ops starting, older co-ops that are expanding and adding membership and moving into new stores. The successful co-ops are really looking for opportunities to support new co-ops, seeing what can they do to support the success of co-ops, not just in the Twin Cities, but in the surrounding area.
East Side Food Co-op opened in 2003, and when we had 2 co-ops loan us money and 1 co-op just outright give us money. We were opened by community members who had been told that this neighborhood didn't have the demographics to support a co-op. These folks, this band of cooperators knew that that's what they wanted. They wanted a natural food store. They wanted it on Central Avenue, which is the main street of Northeast Minneapolis. And they wanted it community-owned. Like a lot of main streets, the big box outlets that came and really wiped out a lot of the storefronts. And if you drive up and down Central Avenue, you'll see that. And we decided we were not only going to build our store out here, we were going to buy the property, we were going to plant a flag on Central Avenue, and we were going to stay here. We own a 12,000 square foot building, so from the very beginning, we were thinking about growth and expansion. Right now, we're going to do about $5.7 million in sales this year. When we opened 8 years ago, we were a $2 million store, so we're growing pretty fast. We have 3,600 members. We started with 26 employees, and now we're at 56 employees. Our board has a commitment to living wage, health insurance for all employees. You know, it's a way to sort of, again, take back the community. There's all those businesses out there that just want to take what they can out of the community and walk away because their shareholders and their stakeholders are elsewhere. Ours are all right here. When we opened, the 2 co-ops closest to us both had double-digit growth that year. We didn't take away any market share of those. And from what I can tell, none of the co-ops do. We all grow, and we don't cannibalize each other. We just get our message out and have more and more people want to be a part of that.
What we're trying to do is to sustain a community of shared values, of values that are dedicated to clean environment, equitable economic relationships, socially responsible business practices. Groceries are the means in which we're accomplishing our mission. But ultimately, the real cost of food is such that if you want to have a situation or an economic system that doesn't exploit individuals, there has to be fairness in that price so that the farmer can stay in the land and gather the price that's higher than they might find in a mass-produced environment. And all that's really driven by just the fundamental need for equitability in the economy and trying to make sure that throughout that chain that individuals who are making food are benefiting fairly.
In the same way that co-ops introduced organic food to the public in the 1970s, they are today trying to establish local food systems and economic fairness. The good news is they don't need to take over the market to do it. By attaining only 2% of the grocery business in the Twin Cities area, co-ops have set a higher standard for the entire region.
When cooperatives become a certain proportion of the trade in a community, then all of the other retailers begin to do a lot of what the cooperative is doing, repeat what the cooperative is doing, support what the cooperative is doing.
So appealing is the idea of people working together to build local economies that co-ops are again on the rise. 70 food co-ops have opened in the last 6 years, and over 100 are in development in 32 states.
I got involved with starting this food co-op just about 4 years ago. I was a student at Antioch, University of New England, and I was trying to think about a project that would be meaningful and give back to the community. I liked the farmland. I was drawn here for that reason. Then I realized it would be really amazing to have a food co-op in our area. I was looking at what was happening nationally in terms of distribution of wealth and power, and a strong need to take back more control. To me, looking around and feeling often powerless in even the local government system and certainly the national government system, I was like, wow, this is a way where a group of individuals can come together and work democratically to achieve something that meets their needs. We got together a co-op committee back in April 2008. I had no idea what I was getting into. Co-ops face different challenges than they have in the past because there's so much more competition in the natural food industry that there has to be a different niche for co-ops, and I think that niche is local food. How do you create a business that represents 1,000 people? How do you provide food at an accessible price while at the same time compensating farmers at a fair price? It relates to community and society in a model that brings together doctors, lawyers, community organizers, farmers. To me, that's how co-ops and corporations really differ, is that democratic control. If you ask me what I've done for the last 4 years, it's community organizing and it's relationship building. When you look out and see all of these people working together with different ideas, that spirit of joy over the work that we're all doing together, true relationships and friendships have been built, and that is pretty exciting work.
I've never been involved in a co-op before. I came out of that more traditional capitalist model. The idea of what I would consider to be competing organizations getting together to benefit the overall movement is totally foreign to me. We've had the Brattleboro Co-op, the Hanover-Lebanon co-ops, Putney Co-op, other co-ops down in Massachusetts and Vermont reach out to us as a startup co-op and say, what can we do to help you? That's very unusual from the normal capitalistic approach to business, because you're just strengthening your competitor. Your mission is to beat them. Co-ops are different than that because it's about having co-ops cooperate with each other is just better for the movement overall.
I think co-ops elevate people to care, to become active, where they can see a tangible benefit right before their eyes. It doesn't surprise me at all. There's this new wave and growth of co-ops because it's so much more than a food store.
Welcome to our first ever annual meeting for Monadnock Community Market Co-op.
This time last year in August, we had 101 founding member owners. We now have 760 founding member owners. So to see that growth happen and to see the type of people that joined and the diversity of people coming to the table, I don't see anything else that exists like that. We're just waiting for our building plans to pass, and we'll break ground to build 13,000 square foot food co-op right in downtown Keene.
To see what new co-ops are accomplishing, I traveled 50 miles south of the Monadnock Co-op to one of the first of the new wave co-ops.
The people that started this store were wanting to support a strong local economy based on food. We started 5 years ago. Our first year, our sales were $8.1 million, and we're on track this year for $19.7 million in sales. We have about 115 employees. About 110 of those are full-time. Last year, We spent $3.2 million purchasing products from 335 local vendors. Between purchasing from local farmers, local employment, we've got over $7 million going back into the local economy.
Capitalism does work, but it tends to funnel the wealth into just a few people. And then a lot of people that are producing and doing the work, they're actually struggling even just to have a living wage. In a cooperative, we don't want to do that. Rather than just taking the money and funneling it and then funneling it away from other people, we want it to be equal, more on a level basis, so everybody can live, so everybody can eat well, so everybody can be comfortable, feel safe.
In my part of the country, new and established co-ops are expanding their connections with local farmers and food processors in an effort to develop a regional food-based economy.
If we want to have ideals, that's fine. But if we want to have a commonwealth, we've got to build a cooperative system that creates that commonwealth, because that is what will give us the strength to be more effective in the marketplace, to serve more people, and to have our ideals mean something.
By creating structures that are based on a commonwealth model, you're building a structure that's going to be here for many generations. It's not at the whims of what stock prices happen to be, CEOs' decisions around what's going to make a good bottom line in this financial quarter. It really is driven by the commitment of a community towards a common purpose.
It comes down to the issue of power and control. Who owns what, and whom do they serve? A society that squanders its wealth producing weapons for war and unhealthy food will not have a long shelf life. So I search for the alternative. Like any informed shopper, I want good value for my money. Healthy food, an emphasis on people over profits, and the ongoing care of land, water, and air. If we want to change how we do business and how we live, food is a good place to start.
Started growing sprouts in my cellar. It's an easy thing to do. If everything goes right, it's easy. You can talk to a lot of my customers, all of them, in fact, ask them what I am. I'm not only the sprout man, I'm their good friend. Co-ops and I have got along very well, very well. I have never, ever had a problem with them. We started when the market was on Chapman Street. It was a very small store. It was like a one-room schoolhouse. It was not a big deal. They were a touchy-feely operation. I mean, it was like a love. They were more involved with people than they were with making money. They made money as an aside, as far as I could figure out. Everybody was going to have a say in how they operated, but they had no idea what the hell they were doing. They were definitely a hippie operation. I can remember going into to deliver, and there was nobody around. They were all in the office doing whatever. They could come there and they could bring their babies in and nurse them while they were doing their shopping, and nobody gave a shit. And I remember breaking in when I shouldn't have a couple times, but now they're married, and they are one of the movers and the shakers of this whole operation. Then when they came onto Main Street, you get into high gear then. They had something to sell in there, good food. They wanted to have it as reasonable as possible, and they wanted everybody to get in on the act. The people are the ones that are saying what we're going to do about this whole operation. A co-op, that's why it's a co-op. Kids had ideas. The people own the business, but they're active in it. It's a different concept altogether. Or you wouldn't think so if you went in there to buy something, unless you knew what I'm telling you, and I'm right. The whole thing I like it. Brattleboro Market is the same way. Brattleboro Co-op is one hell of an operation up there now. Every co-op that I know, they all were hippies. They all started as hippies, every damn one of them. And I found out that they weren't different at all. They were the same as I. So all of these places now are getting big, and I tell you, I never would. If I were a betting person, I never ever would have bet that it would. 20 years later, they've bought McCusker's. They just built that, opened it this week, and I don't know. I wouldn't be surprised if there's something else in the background that they're going to do. I don't believe this thing has ended at all. I think it's just starting.